if they can start. Great.
Right on cue.
Perfect.
Okay, great. Let's move on to our Pledge of Allegiance. Can we get the flag up? All right, if you all
Got one right
stand
behind me.
and join me, hand over heart, ready, pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty
and justice for all.
All right, thank you. Madam Clerk, can we go ahead and do a roll call, please?
Yes, thank you. Good morning. Director Branscombe,
Yes, ma'am.
Chapman,
Here.
Gog,
Yes.
Early for Guerrero, absent Jennings, absent Joyner,
Here.
Lauren,
Here.
Sander,
Here.
Vice Chair Soon,
Here.
Chair Gallardo is absent, and ex officio member, it looks like Costa for Benny Paul.
Here.
Thank you.
All right, great. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I'm going to move on to public communications, seeing for anyone wanted to speak on any items not on the agenda. At this time, I'm looking at our attendee list. I don't see any hands up. Lynette, do you see anybody?
There's no public communications.
Okay, great. With that, I'm going to move to on to consent. We've got a consent calendar ahead of us, and take any questions from our members.
Move to approve consent, Gog.
Okay, thank you. Just before I move on to that, I'm going to just look to see if there's any public comment on consent calendar. And Madam Clerk, I don't see anybody. If you could confirm that for me.
Right, confirmed. There's no public comment.
Okay, great. And we've got a motion from Director Gog.
Joyner will second.
Okay, Director Joyner seconds. And then could you go to a roll call vote, please?
Director Branscombe,
Yes.
Chapman,
Aye.
Gog,
Yes.
Early for Guerrero, absent Jennings, absent Joyner,
Aye.
Lauren,
Aye.
Sander,
Aye.
Vice Chair Soon,
Aye.
and Chair Gallardo is absent. Motion carries.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to our action items, Madam Clerk, if you could go ahead and tee us up for the first one.
Yes, thank you. Action item number 5 is Sacramento Regional Emergency Preparedness Strategy for the 6-county region. And Barbara Von Bechtel will be presenting this item instead of Michael Rawson.
Oh, great. Good morning, Barbara.
Good morning, everybody. It's good to see everyone this morning.
You as well.
All right. This item is SACOG is seeking approval from the Transportation Committee to recommend that the Board of Directors approve the Sacramento Regional Emergency Preparedness Strategy. From now on, I'll just refer to it as the strategy for the 6-county region. SACOG presented the final draft of the strategy to the Transportation Committee and the board back in May of this year. During the months of June and July, staff and our consultant WSP, we met with our transit coordinating committee, and we had a strategy working group, and we reviewed the final draft of the strategy to receive any further comments. The TCC and the strategy working group both accepted the framework to the strategy as it was, with no further comments. In July, staff and our consultant WSP completed the final deliverable for the Sacramento Regional Emergency Preparedness Strategy, which was the executive summary, which you have as one of your attachments today to the staff report. The strategy is organized into 9 sections. We have a section on equity and inclusion commitment, situational overview, a concept of operations, interagency coordination, transportation resources, evacuation, communications, implementation of the strategy, and then a summary of key recommendations. An appendix is included in the strategy that notes various resources such as funding opportunities, maps of regional hazards like earthquakes and flooding areas, and an assessment of populations in the SACOG region that may need additional assistance when evacuating. The executive summary provides the methodology for developing the strategy, why we did it, and a summary of those key recommendations I mentioned just a moment ago. So you have that executive summary in attachment A, and then we have the full multiple pages of our actual full strategy report is in attachment B. Once we get approval of the strategy, we'll publish the executive summary on our website, and we'll also provide a link for anyone who wants to read the full strategy report and use the information in there. And last, I want to thank Caltrans for funding this project through their Sustainable Transportation Planning Grant Program. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Let's see, raise hand. I do have a question. You covered high points, but I didn't get a deep enough understanding of exactly what's being recommended here. You've spoken to the process. What's the substance of what's happening here?
We're looking for the committee to recommend to the board to approve the strategy document for the 6-county region. This document is focusing specifically on transportation issues related to emergency preparedness, with a focus on actually public transportation and looking at those populations that are otherwise disadvantaged with transportation would need additional assistance to evacuate in the event of an emergency or other natural disaster.
You didn't want to go through the materials that were included with the.
I can go through the executive summary if you'd like. The whole document's over 200 pages long, so I don't know if the group wants to go through that in detail.
That's my point. It's over 200 pages long, and I think it, and with respect, ma'am, I just think it deserves a little more conversation.
Of course, we can definitely look through the executive summary if you'd like to do that with the group.
I'd be supportive of that.
Okay. Great, just let me bring that up. Give me one moment. It's the first 6 pages of the document in your attachment. And really going through the background, we went forward to get this Caltrans grant to really look at transportation issues related to emergency preparedness. Though we have, throughout our region, different agencies have their own emergency plans. They work with their offices of emergency services. Since our role as SACOG is looking at transportation and also coordination within our region, this plan is really looking at how to better coordinate interjurisdictional, interagency coordination for emergency events to efficiently deploy public transportation assets like transit vehicles, which has been done in the past, but that's not always been a big part of the planning for the region. So this is a document that's trying to help with those other emergency plans to be an add-on to those. And then also as part of our plan to the strategy is to go forward and actually implement what's in the strategy. We're actually starting an emergency preparedness committee with our transit operators and also working with our offices of emergency services and our jurisdictions to have everyone coordinate together so they know what's available for the populations within their areas that don't have their own way to evacuate in the event of some kind of catastrophe or other natural disaster. So the strategy is structured. I already mentioned the structure, those 9 parts. We have a concept of operations, which is really a relocation of operational plans. So it recommends our transit agencies develop a plan for maintaining operations if they cannot stay at their current site, which is, very likely in some of our areas. Their operational facilities may, if there was a flood event, may be underwater. How could they move somewhere else yet still continue operating as they need to either continue their operations where they can or to help people evacuate? And then also that coordination again between the agencies and also creating interoperable communications. That's been an issue in the past with other emergencies, making sure that all of the agencies involved, in this case, transportation operations, they can all talk to each other and know who's going where, who's taking people where. And then also how, when we've in the past evacuated folks from other areas outside our region, how do we, if we evacuate them here, how do we get them back? Making sure that we know how that's going to work. Having mutual aid agreements, again, coordinating together, making sure everyone knows what they're supposed to be doing, where, and how they can all talk to each other. Joint training efforts relating to evacuations, and joint planning and response efforts too, for any kind of events. And then also developing stakeholders, getting all those groups I've mentioned all to talk to each other, when they do to some degree, but more so we'd like to in the future, because you never know what's going to happen. And then also this has a part about communicating with the public, how people can get evacuation assistance if they need it. They can't get out themselves. How do we make sure they get the information they need, and then all the varieties of methods you can think of, that they know that they can, have assistance to get out if they need to. And there's other smaller things, like I just talked about pick up and drop off policies. Where are we going to pick people up if they're being evacuated? And then whether will they be dropped off? And then also the reverse of when they can return, if they can return. How do they get back? We have things even like pet policies. That's been an issue in past evacuations of, what kind of animals can they take? How can they take them? And, not just service animals necessarily, but, people's pets as well. And then also pulling together all the data on what vehicles are available, specifically transit vehicles, and how could those be made available, along with people to operate those vehicles too. And then a big part of the strategy that we actually added was related to zero emission vehicles, because I think you all know that in California, our transit operators over the next 13 years or so, that they're going to have to switch over to having zero emission fleets for a majority of their fleet. That how do we make sure those zero emission vehicles can keep running if they're being used as part of an emergency evacuation event? And we've already had different providers come and provide us information about portable bus charging facilities, be they electric or hydrogen. And then last we have transportation strategies, how we can use our transportation infrastructure to best get people out, things like contraflow, if it's appropriate, operating on the shoulder, making sure emergency vehicles have access at the same time, and then equity inclusion, again, making sure those folks who may have communication strategies, mobility problems, that they are able to get out. And then again, we're also addressing the issue of people with pets, but also service animals as well. So if you have any other questions, I can do my best to answer those. That was the
thank
executive
you.
Summary.
Thank you. You know your stuff. I appreciate it very much. In terms of this, it's defined as strategy, and 200 pages is a lot to digest, particularly in a form like this.
Sure.
So it really sounds like the transportation plan in support of emergency preparedness, right? Is that what we're
correct.
talking about?
Yes.
It's really a plan versus a strategy. I presume, without getting into it, I presume there was a starting point, some existing plan, and that was reviewed, and some additional suggestions made, and cognizance of evolutions in certain segments of the transportation network. For example, a plan to use all electric vehicles in an emergency, that scares the hell out of me. Once I heard that, I just went on red alert. For example, there's some folks that actually think we can use electric vehicles in combat through the Department of Defense, and I think it's foolish. And I think it is a serious weak point. And we could have a disaster, and someone's going to look back at us and say, yeah, and of course I don't think we have jurisdiction over what the various agencies purchase in terms of vehicles, be they electric or diesel or natural gas powered, what have you. But if it's all electric in an emergency, that seems like a frightening prospect to me, and seems like a weak point that needs to be addressed.
Director Branscombe, I think that's a fair point. I think that's one of the things is, why we're talking about this and the strategy. I think your comment is well taken, Barbara. If we can make a note of that, and then we can find a way to incorporate that in the strategy. What would be the contingency factor if power is not available or the electrical vehicles were not operable? And just as and Director Davis, I'm going to get to you in a minute, and I apologize earlier. I was on mute. I was trying to talk and it wasn't coming through. But Director Branscombe, when we have this strategy, we need to lay out how we coordinate, and Ms. Van Bechtel laid out the communication segment of it, the interoperability between the agencies. It's a strategy because we don't know what emergency will happen to take place. If the example is talking about flooding, we don't know where the flooding may occur. That may close certain routes, which would require us to reassess, open different routes. So it's a very fluid document. And that's why it's a strategy. There could be several plans contained in there because, again, if you don't know where the affected areas will be, and you'll have to adjust accordingly. So I'm going to come back to your comment earlier. I think that could be something that, from an electrical vehicle perspective, the plan should consider, or the strategy should consider, in the event of an emergency, what to do if the vehicles aren't charged or not working. So your comments well taken. With that, Director Davis, you had a comment as well.
Director Chapman.
Director Chapman. I'm sorry, Director
Oh,
Chapman.
I didn't know.
I'm looking at Davis on there. Director Chapman's apologies.
Sure. Thank you, Vice Chair Soon, and thank you, Barbara, for the presentation. Just a quick question. We've been talking a fair amount about the scenarios around floods, and as you know, Yolo County has a number of floodplains. In there, we talk about the collaboration that SACOG and WSP had with local jurisdictions, and the Yolo Transit District, YCTD, wasn't listed as somebody that was talked to or collaborated with. Do you know if they were or not, or why they weren't part of this? There's 3 other major transportation districts that are listed here, so I'm curious where the Yolo Transportation District fit in on this.
We actually spoke to all of our public transit providers in the region. We just listed some of them, not all of them, because we have 10 different public transit providers in our region. So all of them were actually spoken to, including the Yolo Transportation District.
Great. Thank you so much.
Okay. At this time, I want to give the public a chance to speak, and be happy to come back to the directors for further conversation. Is there anyone from the public have any questions or comments?
Vice Chair Soon, there's no public comment.
Okay, thank you. Bringing it back to our directors. I just want to quickly add, while we're talking about transit routes, because obviously the single vehicle occupancy vehicles use the similar routes, I think it makes sense that if it's going to work for our transit, our buses and such, it'll work for our cars too. So I think this is it's very appropriate for us to examine exit routes out of the area, working with not just Caltrans, but also in transit agencies, but also our local jurisdictions and the road networks. And the document mentioned, signal timing and those kinds of things. So that's going to definitely require local jurisdiction coordination. So just encourage those conversations to continue.
Vice Chair Soon, if I could also just maybe give a little bit of context. I think we've learned from a number of disasters, both threatened and real, in this region. I know when I came to this region, the Oroville Dam crisis was just upon us, right? And the potential for that to give way and to flood. And I think one of the things we learned, Director Branscombe, back to your point, kind of where did this come from? What's the genesis? What's it supposed to do? Is that especially for households that don't have good access to a vehicle, we have assets in the region that are transit vehicles, right? We have vehicles that, and we all over, but as I think Barbara just said, we've got nearly a dozen different agencies that are not really yet, or they weren't prepared to actually coordinate and deploy kind of as, regionally deploy with mutual aid. So one of the many things that we try to address in this is trying to get our really good interoperability and coordination so we can get to, so those agencies are ready, they can get to people, they can evacuate people when needed. And we thank goodness that we didn't have to learn the bad lesson from Oroville, right? But I know there were many lessons that were learned from the Oroville Dam crisis, which I think was part of the genesis for this effort.
Yeah, thank you so much, James. And I think another key component is making sure we're communicating with the very population we're trying to help, right? So that outreach, I think, is really important, so they know where they can go in an emergency to find a way out. Director Branscombe, you had another comment?
Yes, first, my compliments overall. The planning work here and the updating of whatever the existing plan was, the pre-existing plan was, is impressive. And the coordination and uses of technology and what have you, I'm impressed. The real question, I would want to pass on reviewing this until a question is answered. And that question is, if it's electric vehicles, I think it's not unreasonable to ask, are the tools up to the task? And has there been an analysis, a specific analysis of whether or not a fleet of predominantly electric vehicles will be up to the task of addressing an emergency?
I don't know that we have that answer at this time, but
yeah, no, I understand. No, I don't think we do have the answer. That's my question. So it's a known unknown. We don't know if those tools are up to the task, or unless there's been an analysis that says a predominantly electric vehicle set of tools is up to the task.
Yeah.
Director Branscombe and Vice Chair Soon, I'll suggest something, right? Look, you're raising a great point. And as Vice Chair Soon just said, in some ways, as you said, Director Branscombe, it's a known unknown, because partly we don't know what the transition for the transit fleet is going to look like. You're going to be hearing more from us in different venues soon about hydrogen, right? And the possibilities of hydrogen.
And as they transition, I think it would be neat if they had an awareness of the fact that their fleet may be required in an emergency, and will that an electric vehicle fleet be up to the task? That's my question. I'm sorry, I'm repeating myself.
No, you're bringing up a great point. Some of you who are on the Mega Region Working Group are aware that we, along with the Bay Area and San Joaquin County, so 16 counties, just won a state planning grant to look at medium and heavy duty fleet transition, right? And charging and hydrogen. So what I'd suggest is, let's take this back as staff. Your question, right, about the ability, because whether you're going to evacuate people or you're running an express bus route that runs for 100 miles and has to run twice a day, this is going to be an issue. So, and we've got some work coming up too around transit funding through the state budget. So my suggestion would be, let's the evacuation, the preparedness strategy you have in front of you today, I think is important to get done, and you have an action in front of you. Let us staff take back, how can we answer your question, right? Where else could we feed this into our work that's coming up in the next 6 to 12 months?
And very quickly, I would suggest that the question be presented to the transit operators, because they're going to be the ones called upon to actually execute.
I want to make sure everybody's understanding this. SACOG is not going to go drive any bus anywhere in an emergency, right? So this is all about convening and connecting per our strategic plan. And absolutely, we have a transit coordinating committee, has all the operators in the region on it. It meets frequently, I want to assure you. So they're in the literal driver's seat here. So yes.
Thank you.
Okay, and Director Lauren, did you still have a comment? I saw you had your hand up for a second.
I just had a comment because I am the former chair of Yolo Transportation District, and we have been, we having the transportation hat on, have had emergencies in Yolo County. We have had smoke, fire, and water, and we have a diversified fleet, and we've had to use the diversity of our fleet. Sometimes that's CNG when CNG is the thing that's necessary. So I would just know that the transportation agencies themselves know their fleet, they know their timeline for replacement vehicles, and they know how to plan for emergencies. Thank you.
Perfect. No, thank you very much. Yeah, and these are just considerations that can be incorporated into our strategy. I'm going to go quickly to, I see Councilmember Early in the audience. He's got her hand up. Good morning, Councilmember. Can we free up so she can, oh, there you go. Yeah.
Yes, she's in the meeting, Vice Chair Soon.
Okay, great.
Thank you. No, I wanted to make sure that I was on as a panelist.
Okay, we've got you. You're in the meeting. Thank you.
Got it. Okay, great. All right. If there's no other questions or comments, I'd like to take a motion from any of the directors.
Lauren will move the item. Thank you.
Second,
Thank you,
Chapman.
All right, and seconded by Director Chapman.
Yep.
Can we get a roll? Okay, thank you. Can we get a roll call vote, please?
Thank you. Director Branscombe?
I can't support going forward, absent having the questions I asked answered. You've got a plan. This is a plan, not a strategy, or strategy plan, whatever. And I've got a real question as to whether or not the tools presumed in the strategy are up to the task. And that, I think that question needs to be answered before blessing it. So respectfully, no.
Okay, thank you. Director Chapman?
Aye.
Gog?
Yes.
Early for Guerrero?
Abstain.
Jennings? Absent. Joyner? Director Joyner, could you indicate your vote? I'll mark him absent. Director Lauren?
Aye.
Sander?
Aye.
Vice Chair Soon?
Aye.
And Chair Gallardo is absent. Motion carries.
Okay, thank you. Next item, please, Madam Clerk.
Next agenda item is action item number 6, engage, empower, implement funding increase. And Chris Doherty will be presenting the item.
Thank you, Lynette. Again, Chris Doherty with the transportation team. And the item before you today is a request to add some additional funding to the Engage, Empower, and Implement program. As you are aware, the EI program is intent is to create a pipeline of projects from low-income and disadvantaged communities, especially those of color. I'm not going to focus that much on the content of that program because you're about to hear an item after me from Rosie Ramos that will give you an update and more information on that item. This item specifically today is to add some the request to add some additional funding into this program. Originally, this program was funded out of the budget of the 2020 funding round, which was a 4-county program. They had requested and were approved for $3 million of program budget moving forward. That, again, was originally a 4-county funding program, but now since the corrective action and since we are moving our funding round to a 6-county round, we wanted to ensure that this was a full 6-county program because we believe this is important. So the request today is to add some funding to that program from 2 sources. One of those sources is the SACOG managed funds, and the second source is from the remnant of a congressional earmark that was used. So There's an additional benefit to using these funds. These new funds are very flexible in nature and will enable this program to operate and be requested from a wider range of applicants. You're going to hear more of the feedback here shortly from Rosie, some of the feedback they've gotten from the community on the type of applicants that could apply for it. So this would enable not just cities and counties to apply if those applications are deemed worthy of funding. So with that concludes our presentation, and I'm available for any questions you might have.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Doherty. Are there any questions from the members before I go out to the public? Seeing none, to the public for any comments or questions. I don't see any hands raised. If you could confirm for me, Madam Clerk.
Yes, there's no public comment.
Okay, thank you. Bringing back to our directors for any further comments, or I'll take a motion at this time. Do we want any?
Yeah,
Is this?
I'll move the staff recommendation to increase the funding. Thank you. It's Director Chapman.
Okay. Thank you.
Lauren will second.
Motion Director Chapman and second from Director Lauren. Thank you. Roll call vote, please.
Director Branscombe,
Yes.
Chapman,
Aye.
Gog,
Yes.
Early for Guerrero,
Aye.
Jennings absent, Joyner,
Aye.
Lauren,
Aye.
Sander,
Aye.
Vice Chair Soon,
Aye.
and Chair Gallardo's absent. Motion carries.
Great. Thank you. That's it for our action items. We're going to move into our informational items. Madam Clerk, if we go ahead and go on to the next one.
Yes, our agenda item number 7 is information, update on engage, empower, implement, draft framework recommendations presented by Rosie Ramos.
Thank you. Excuse me. Good morning, everyone. Rosie Ramos, the project manager for EEI, accompanied by Nicole, who will also be presenting with me today. Very exciting coming up of the last action. So this morning, I'm going to provide some background and go over some of the recommendations that we've received from our consultants. But before we go into that, I wanted to do a quick reminder and go back a little bit to go over how we have gotten here. The next slide. As you just heard from Chris, this program began in 2020 through the funding round at the time, and we had allocated $3 million, which we're now up to 3.8, which is really exciting. And it's really focused on investing in our region's disinvested communities. As you all made that decision at the time, we were also undergoing the development of our statement of commitment and change and our racial equity action plan that was adopted in 2022. And of which EEI is a key component of that document. We were also working internally in budgeting and program planning, and in 2023, which is now, we were able to bring on our great partners, HRNA advisors, to help us create a framework for this new program. So the goal for EEI is that we establish and fund a community-based outreach and engagement outreach and engagement projects throughout the 6-county SACOG region. We want to invest in the engagement as a strategy for developing more equitable projects across. So EEI's main goal is to fund and normalize the community-centered planning process for project development. And we want to invest in these collaborative approaches between our member cities and counties and the CBOs within our communities and help fund a process that rebuilds trust and can help create the community-supported and led project concepts and actionable steps for implementation. EEI is our first funding program that explicitly dedicates money to our historically underserved and disinvested communities. And the efforts from EEI will help inform policy recommendations in our upcoming 2025 blueprint, which is focusing on the triple bottom line of equity, environment, and economy. So what are some of the examples that we could expect with EEI? If you recall last year, our friends from MTC and SJCOG, San Joaquin County, joined us to share their similar efforts. And MTC has done community-based transportation plans for a long time in the Bay Area. They've noted we led a participatory budgeting exercise that was very successful, which is what they talked about when they joined us. SJCOG has hosted extensive community engagement that led to the creation of the Stockton Mobility Collective and a $7.4 million STEP grant, which is really huge for them. And more local example is the Franklin District Community Playbook that looks at existing conditions and strategizes for solutions. And a great example that we also have learned about in Long Beach is their Cambodia Town community created a vision plan that established guiding principles, shared values, and specific community recommendations. So these are just some of the type of examples that we can expect through the EI process, and of course could be also very specific projects if that is what comes out of the engagement process. So what have we heard? I won't go too much into detail because our last month's presentation dove into this, but just a quick reminder, in order to get to these goals and the visions that we have for EEI, we wanted to ensure that we collaborated with the CBOs closely and create the framework that will get us to a funding program that is inclusive of their needs. And we also coordinated with their cities and counties. So this summer, our consultants led a robust engagement process that engaged over 40 representatives from over 30 organizations across the 6 counties. And SACOG staff also engaged with local city, county, and staff. And so our key findings, as we discussed, identified CBO concerns with grant and contract challenges, a need for technical support in a pre-application period, wanting to do the work for rebuilding trust and transparency, and the need for support and staff capacity building. And similarly, our cities and county staff also identified the need for trust building, simpler applications, the importance of evaluation metrics, defining the project successes, and better collaboration approaches. So we were saying a lot of the same things, just with different language. And all of this information from our CBOs and the insight from jurisdictions, along with best practices and expertise from the consultants, have helped create the recommendations in your packet. And before we get into the discussion of those recommendations, I want to turn it over to Nicole to sort of set the stage before we dive into those recommendations.
Thanks, Rosie. I just want to take a few minutes to go over some of the key information that will really help you understand the intention and also the structure behind our EEI funding framework recommendations. So first and foremost, next slide, the recommendations explore opportunities to advance equity in both the design of the grant funding process itself and within each recommendation. And our consultant has identified 3 core dimensions of equity to really help us achieve the goals and visions that we've set out for EEI. So first we have structural equity. Structural equity addresses the underlying structural factors and policies that uphold inequities. It really commits to both correcting past harms and preventing future unintended consequences. Procedural equity is what designs our decision-making processes to make sure that they're transparent and inclusive. And it also acknowledges the imbalances in power and technical expertise that often exist when we have marginalized communities working with public agencies in decision-making processes. And this, I think it's important to note, is something that we consistently heard and discussed throughout our engagement process throughout this year. And we also have distributional equity, which ensures the fair and diverse distribution of services and resources. And it also places a priority on supporting our communities with the greatest needs. So as you've probably already noticed by reviewing these recommendations, we organized them into 6 key stages. So in the full draft of the EEI framework, each stage will identify critical access points, how to best address barriers, especially for community-based organizations, and additional considerations for implementation. But today, we're just focusing on recommendations for each key stage, and those include project funding guidelines, our pre-application process, our project application process, project funding, and the invoicing process, which I know very exciting, but it's really important and integral, especially when we think about equity and access for our smaller CBOs. We'll also go through project execution and program evaluation. So to talk through each of these key stages, I'm going to turn it back over to Rosie.
Make a little moving around musical chairs. Okay, thanks Nicole for that. So as Nicole mentioned, these are the concepts that we had in mind, that our consultants had in mind as they crafted the recommendations. And as a reminder, these recommendations will be used to create the guidelines and the application and the pre-application materials and workshops. So for the funding guidelines, the recommendations include prioritizing other priority efforts that fall outside of just transportation when the program has access to more flexible funds. So effectively funding programs that align with what is important to the community and what is being identified as challenges and issues that need solutions. And of course, we just talked about adding flexible funds here. So this enables us to tackle this recommendation. Also promoting diverse and inclusive applicants by ensuring the access to the grant, just by even how we distribute the information, how do we let people know that this is an opportunity, is something that's really important so that we can begin to have access to different organizations that haven't been involved in the past. And then EEI is also an engagement effort that should prioritize the work of CBOs. So looking at it as a strategic engagement process, the majority of funds are being recommended that they should go to CBOs doing this work, with awards between 150 and 300,000 to a max of 500,000. And again, this is partnership, so that would be the total. That does include some funding for the jurisdictions, but they are recommending that majority of funds go to CBOs. For the pre-application process, again, this was something that was very important to a lot of folks and has come up as best practices across different sectors, from adaptation to transportation planning to general planning itself. This concept is really critical for us, as the best practices are indicating that we need to spend more time even before an application goes out, for the CBOs and jurisdictions. With the conversations with them, we really heard that folks want to make sure that they understand what is going to be expected, be clear about the work that they have to do, and also the pre-application in this case can really help with some of the capacity building that we know is needed for our CBOs and jurisdictions, and helping foster stronger relationships between them. For the application section of our framework, the recommendations are looking to distribute the program broadly and bringing new partnership opportunities, being clear and straightforward with the materials, and dedicate SACOG staff to help with the process. And of course, creating an application window that is the most comfortable for folks. And we're hearing that that is about 2 to 3 months. And that also includes the evaluation and being upfront about extra points to the most vulnerable communities, one of which the key communities that came up was rural communities needing to be set aside potentially. For funding and invoicing, as Nicole mentioned, is exciting, but very critical, is that we definitely need to have clear requirements and templates with simple instructions for how to invoice and go through the reimbursement process that streamlines all of our contracts. And one of the biggest barriers we heard from folks at the CBO level is that when starting a contract, it's often very difficult to carry the burden of the cost of dedicating the staff and the materials, and then having to wait a long time for that first check that is all reimbursement based. And so really looking to create a structure where we could provide 5 to 10% upfront to CBOs, and then allow them to have the access to funds so that they can begin the reimbursement process moving forward. For project execution, the recommendations indicate the need for technical assistance along the way for both jurisdictions and CBOs working together to identify those engagement strategies that will be conducted, making space for SACOG to function as a mediator during the project execution, and strategically defining those roles and responsibilities, whether that's like an MOU at the very beginning or just consistent conversations. Folks were interested in SACOG operating as a mediator. And last but not least, we have the program evaluation. So our recommendations indicate that creating an EEI review board from people of various backgrounds centered around underrepresented communities, and then of course including metrics around the attendance of events and community, and also a community narrative that highlights the engagement process and outcomes. So that's looking to more of a qualitative metric, but a very important one nonetheless. And finally, looking at metrics by geography, organization type, and the ability to reach traditionally excluded communities. So those are the recommendations that are in the packet. And I will stop here to take any comments or questions. Again, these are recommendations that will help inform the guidelines and the application, but happy to discuss any thoughts.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ramos. And just to confirm, we're gonna, this is informational obviously today,
Yes.
but you'll bring it back for adoption at each committee, at SACOG, and then the full board at a later date.
Yeah, the intent is to bring it to you all back in October. Right now, we are we have shared out the drafts to city staff as well as CBOs, and so letting them comment and react to this. Based on those, we'll send it back to our consultants, and then we'll make some edits based on your comments here today as well, and then we'll have that refined framework for you all in October.
Okay, thank you very much. Director Branscombe, yes, your hand's up.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I'm going through the materials here, and the PowerPoint deck was excellent, and I don't see it in my packet. And do you make a practice of keeping them separate, staff? How's that work?
This is just used to elaborate on what's included, but we're happy to send it over, and I believe we have it posted on our website. Posted.
Smith, I think I'm fading out here. Oh, very quickly. Well, I'm one of those guys. I'm very visual, and PowerPoints are great means of communication, and so it's nice if they're included. Otherwise, please send it to me.
Will do.
Or unless it's available someplace, I can just reach out.
We will definitely send it to you, Lynette. I don't know if I think you were going to comment.
Yes, this is Lynette, Director Branscombe. So these always are posted on our website following each meeting, but I'll also make sure that this one is sent out to all of you after this meeting as well, so that you'll have that on you.
And again, I think it'd be useful if these were made available prior to the meeting, because with all respect to the text, PowerPoints, the reason they call them PowerPoints is because they're powerful. and it'd be very useful to have in advance.
Noted. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, can we go to our attendees? I don't see any hands up or for comment or questions.
Vice Chair, there's no public comment.
Okay, thank you so much. I'll bring it back to the directors. Unless there's any further comments or questions, this is just, again, informational for today. Seeing none, we're going to close this item and move on to item 8. Back to you, Madam Clerk.
Thank you. Item 8 is an information item, update on regional transit network study corridor prioritization. And I believe Nicole Porter will be present. Oh, excuse me. Christina Svensk will be presenting this item.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Nice to see everyone today. So yes, I'm going to be presenting an introduction for this, and then our consultant team from Jacobs and Nelson Nygaard will be elaborating on some of the technical work that went into this. So we haven't brought this to you in a while, so we thought it was a good time to update. We've been working very diligently on identifying corridors and now prioritizing those corridors, as well as identifying some new potential near-term improvements. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. So Phil, you can go to the next slide. So a little bit about the agenda today. I'm going to talk about the study process, the goals and the outcomes, do a little reminder about the timeline and what the regional transit network is, and then talk quite a bit about the corridor prioritization activities themselves, as well as the near-term improvements identification, and then next steps of this project. Next slide, please. So just a reminder a little bit about this study. In 2021, the board adopted the 2021 Next Generation Transit Strategy, which had a lot of really great improvements identified in there and activities that SACOG could start to work on with the goal of improving regional travel in the coming years and actually even decades as well. So the Regional Transit Network Study was really the first one of those action items that we started to work on. And this is taking a look at our region as a 6-county region to identify where there are gaps in longer distance travel on transit, so that people who may wish to take transit to go on a commute or go to recreational activities or whatever it may be, have the option of transit where there currently isn't any now. As you know, we have many different transit providers in our region, and there's not a ton of cross-boundary, cross-jurisdictional travel options outside of the single occupancy vehicle right now. So this study is looking to address that issue that we've kind of identified through that next generation transit strategy. Next slide, please. So, we really are using SACOG's triple bottom line, equity, environment, and economy as the backbone of this project to help us develop the actual study goals. And so the goals that were created were fast and reliable service, so increasing the competitiveness of transit with driving, equitable investment, so reducing the disparities in travel times and access and providing more transit options for disadvantaged communities. Access and connectivity, this leveraging existing transit services and providing seamless and easy travel for all users to regional centers and destinations. Financial stewardship, so putting public funds to best use by minimizing costs, but also increasing ridership. And lastly, climate smart, so meeting or exceeding the recommendations and targets that we have for reduced emissions and vehicle miles traveled. Next slide, please. So what are we trying to do with the study? The intended outcomes really are mapping of a network with clearly delineated service types. So thinking about things like BRT, rapid bus, express bus, providing key connections and identifying key connection needs with existing and planned local services and routes. This is an important piece here to think about because this is a regional network for mobility. So it is transit, but it's also some of the other pieces that we have like bike share, micro mobility, all of those things. Near-term capital improvements and planning level costs. So these advance existing service corridors that will help build up ridership to make the transition to maybe a more robust, high capacity type of service more seamless. Long-term capital infrastructure needs for the corridors. So what types of improvements will be needed on the ground to support a high capacity network? And then network prioritization results. So this is a guide for SACOG and our partner agencies to help provide a roadmap of how implementation of the corridors would look. Next slide, please. So this process and project was broken up into 4 phases. There will be subsequent phases through different efforts, but this one was 4 phases. So we are currently in phase 3. So just a reminder, phase 1, we evaluated or we developed evaluation framework that included the vision, the goals, objectives, and performance measures to guide the technical process that we're going to talk about today. In phase 2, the potential regional corridors were identified and developed, and that included a screening of potential regional transit corridors to identify the groundwork for the regional high capacity network. So this network is integrated into the blueprint. So we had to do a lot of coordination and collaboration with the blueprint folks here because this essentially is the long range transportation network that we are modeling in our blueprint. Phase 3, which is where we are now, what we'll talk about today, is that the project team developed regional standards to establish a definition of what regional high capacity actually means based on SACOG and partner agency input and informed lessons learned from a peer review study that was done. Also during this phase, the project team conducted an extensive prioritization effort of the regional corridors, which is what's being presented today, to understand the corridors with the greatest potential for implementation. And in phase 4, what we'll be looking at is the implementation blueprint, so to speak. So this includes a summary of local, state, and federal funding that might be available to help advance some of these corridors and the proposed services, but also potential governance options that will set the stage for a future discussion and future analysis on what actually we should be doing in order to operate this service. Next slide, please. So basically the regional transit network here, as we mentioned, is a high level, long range plan that's going to guide the investment in the region. What it is not is a service plan. We are not talking about all the detailed nitty gritty and operations and how these will be operated at this point. We have a few other steps to do before we do that, but we felt it's really important to at least identify the corridors and match services that make the most sense on these corridors based on a lot of different factors. So, it's really important that you can see the map here, which we'll break it up in future slides so you can see it better. But, they really cross jurisdictional lines, which is going to enable more regional trips to be made by transit. It's going to increase transit capacity in the developing and growing areas that we have in our region. And it really provides key connections for our local operators so that their local service can be operated more efficiently and effectively and move people to these services. And as I mentioned before, leveraging some of the existing services like light rail and Capital Corridor and some of the other great longer distance services that we already have. Next slide, please. So the prioritization process outcomes, and I think we're going to have our consultants take a look at this in more detail. But we are going to be talking about a rank list of corridors that prioritize the investments that we're looking at for this region. And this really emphasizes the existing needs, but also equity. And it also considers the projected growth and future needs. So I'm going to turn it over to the consultants right now to keep going on all of this.
So building from what Christina just said, an important part of the prioritization included input and feedback from the transit operators and other agency stakeholders to ensure that the draft prioritization results made sense and aligned with their understanding and expectations. So here we can see the project goals that align to the triple bottom line that Christina just presented earlier here today. And for each of these goals, next slide, please, we had a number of metrics. We're showing a few here, quantitative metrics to help guide the prioritization process. So we looked at each of the corridors and evaluated them per the metrics that align to these goals and objectives. Next slide. There's 3 service types that we've identified in the plan. The long distance corridors, primarily along freeway corridors, the medium distance, which are primarily along major arterials, and then short distance as well. So each of these corridors were scored through that process, quantitative process aligned to those goals. And here we can see the results of that scoring from 1 to 5, 5 being the highest score and 1 being the lowest score, to help inform the prioritization. And if you flip to the next slide, we can see those same long distance corridors here mapped. Green meaning high, scored high on the prioritization results, and red meaning scored lower on the prioritization results. I want to point out again that this was really influenced by the existing needs and equity, although it did consider future growth as well. These results, again, were shared with the agencies and operators over the last month or so to make sure, again, that these results made sense to them. So if you look at the next slide, here we can start to see some of the results of the medium distance scoring. Again, 1 to 5, green being illustrating sort of the higher scores, red illustrating some of the lower prioritization scores based on those metrics that we just saw. So you can see some of the corridors here. There's 3 pages of these because there's a lot of medium distance corridors. So here you can see the next 2 of 3, the scores there, and 3 of 3, the scores there. But if we look at that on a map, it's a little bit easier to digest. Here we can see the results of that prioritization across the region on the medium distance corridors. Once again, this was shared with the agency partners and stakeholders, as well as the operators. And we asked the question, did we miss anything? Do these make sense? Do these results, are these what you would have expected? And finally, the short distance corridors, similarly, were scored to that same quantified process. And so you can see the results of that tabularly here, scoring 1 to 5, and once again, showing the map of those medium distance resulting scores on the next slide. So we paused at this moment and got input from everybody to make sure we learned some helpful items, but I'd say based on the stakeholder input and operator input, I think the results made sense to everybody. And so we obtained that input and provided the list here that we're seeing today. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Phil to talk about some of the near-term opportunities based on this prioritization, but near-term opportunities for really implementing some things, possibilities of implementing some corridors in the near term. Phil?
Thanks, Christina and Seth. As Seth mentioned, this study includes identifying some near-term speed and reliability improvements. With the prioritization, we're looking out for the timeline of the upcoming blueprint, potentially beyond. But we know that there are many issues, challenges to address in terms of transit speed and reliability today. And as part of the study, wanted to advance some of those through some cost estimating and identification of improvements. This study includes selecting up to 5 corridors for those near-term speed and reliability improvements. And we will estimate capital and operating costs. This is the list of potential improvements that we've run by the Transit Coordinating Committee and the Regional Planning Partnership. We've got some transit priority improvements here, such as transit signal priority and transit only lanes, queue jumps, and also some transit access improvements as well to make sure that residents and workers can access bus stops safely on these priority corridors. We pulled together a list of potential near-term improvements corridors based on plans from throughout the region, from many stakeholders. We looked at various projects, whether they were some kind of transit upgrade or BRT or corridor plan, and use that combined with the prioritization results and the presence of existing transit service, prioritizing frequent transit service to put together this list. And using this list and our feedback that we've received through the TCC and the RPP, and with Christina, we have 5 corridors that we would like to advance for near-term speed and reliability improvements. You'll see there are 6 check marks on the list here, but we are planning to treat Stockton and Broadway as one corridor because of the existing SAC-RT bus route that uses those 2 corridors. We'll just look at them together. So I'll give you a chance to look at the list here. Let us know if you have any feedback.
And it may be helpful also to identify all of the corridors still remain on the sort of short-term or near-term opportunity list, as well as the full network of corridors that we illustrated earlier are still part of the overall long-term plan and prioritized, but specifically these are working with the agency partners and their plans. These are the specific corridors that really rose to the top for opportunities, again, for very near-term, basically speed and reliability, transit improvements along those corridors. So we shared this same result and this list with the operators and agency partners, as Phil said, and got their input accordingly. And I think they also agreed that these looked like the best of the list to move forward with more detailed information and refinement.
I just have a quick note personally, for Elk Grove. I think I'm glad to see Bighorns on there. I think our staff is in conversations with you all about that. I'd just like to encourage the conversations to continue. The second largest city in the county, I want to make sure that there's good connectivity within this plan. So we can get up and see Director Branscombe City, for instance, without too much trouble and a lot of shifting of modes. So please continue to work with our staff. Thank you.
Okay, well, that leads us to next steps for this study. I think I'm handing it back to Christina.
Yeah, thanks, Phil. As you can see, we've been working on the near-term capital improvements, and we'll continue to refine those as well as move forward with the prioritization that we just presented. And as I mentioned, August to October, we'll be refining the funding and governance pieces. One really important kind of note about the governance piece here is we're not developing any sort of recommendations of governance as part of this. The study is simply laying out all the potential options that would be available. We plan to really engage with our partner agencies and operators in a future effort to really kind of nail that down. But it was important for us to think about that as part of this study and how we can move forward with accelerating these corridors. And so then in October and November, we'll be completing this study, and you likely will see this in its final state at the December board meeting. That's the plan, or January. So look forward to that meeting in the future. Thank you, Phil. So we'll open this up to any questions or discussion that you all may have today.
Great, thank you, Christina. Any question? Oh, I see Director Branscombe. Go ahead. Director Branscombe, you're frozen.
An accident there, just a moment.
There you go.
Fell apart. First of all, Christine, anything you're involved in is first rate, and this is really an excellent presentation. Suggestion.
Look, Branscombe.
Long distance corridor. Yes.
Maybe turn your video off. If you're breaking up a little bit, turn your video off, and then we might be able to get you on your audio.
Yeah.
There you go.
Testing 1, 2, 3.
Very good.
Thank you.
That's much better.
I'm not that much to look at anyway. Anyway, back to if I could direct your attention to the long distance corridor. It's a classic network, which is logical, but transit to and from Marysville, Yuba City, Sutter County, Yuba County, and the link is into downtown Sacramento. Well, downtown Sacramento is an employment center, certainly, and an entertainment center, witness the Golden One, and good nightlife and restaurants, Frank Fat's, Ella's, what have you. But there is, in terms of interest, there's a great deal of interest in being able to have a link with Placer County. There are major industrial companies in the Placer County and down into the Folsom area in El Dorado County. And this provides no linkage. It also, and Beale Air Force Base shouldn't be forgotten. I mean, there's, 7,000 to 8,000 people out there. I think a strong suggestion expressing my concern would be a long distance corridor that would include a link between Marysville, Yuba City, what have you, into Placer County, connecting into Lincoln. And for example, the major entertainment venue we have here is a Hard Rock and the Outdoor Arena. The Outdoor Arena attracts 18,000 people at concerts, and people are paying $200 a seat just to sit up in the grass. And so it's a very popular destination, and the bedroom communities can't get there unless they go into the hub and all the way up. So I think I'm suggesting that the consulting group and staff take a look at linking, providing that link between Yuba County and Placer County. Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate that comment, Director Branscombe. I wanna clarify one thing. I think it's a really great reminder here to remember high capacity transit, what that means. And we're primarily talking about service that's 15 minutes frequency or better, ideally better than that. But I think for this study, that was sort of the parameters. I just actually recently spoke with Mr. Mock from Yuba Sutter Transit and talked to them about their plans for service there. And he was comfortable with us not including that in there because to start, it's going to take a long time for that to get to a corridor that might warrant that level of frequency. So it's definitely something that is part of our regional network. It's just not meeting the frequency minimums that we're talking about for this specific study. So we're super supportive of that because I think you're right. I think there's the potential for it to grow into something more as the development potentially occurs, where there's the need for the linkage between Placer County and the entertainment venues that you mentioned. So it's definitely top of mind and it's there. It's just not showing up on this for some of the more definition-oriented reasons of what we're talking about here.
Well, again, the shopping, there's no shopping in downtown Sacramento. The Arden Fair Mall is a ghost of its former self. Nordstrom moved out, for example. And so the center of gravity for shopping is no longer in Sacramento. Center of gravity regionally for shopping is in the Placer County and certainly some in the Folsom area also. And so we lose that linkage. And so I will reach out to our local administrator and share my opinion. I think he might have missed, he's missing an opportunity in the position he shared with you. Thank you.
Sure, no problem.
Any other comments from our directors?
I have a general comment, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, go ahead, Dr. Sam.
I've served on the Regional Transit Board as its chair. I've been 21 years now in local office, hard to imagine. I am very optimistic by nature, but I have to admit I am challenged when thinking about transit. I think it really hit me when I was a transit board member the first time, and I realized the more people we haul, the more money we lose. And it was like, what's the mission again? How does this work? That was the first mental challenge. But what I see now is we are a region, a county of 1.6 million people, and regional transit ridership is still far below what it was pre-pandemic. Maybe 30,000 riders a day at most, something on those terms. So we're talking about maybe 2% of commuters. And I worry that when we have big debates and planning sessions and spend a lot of resource on transit, it's almost like having a debate of how many angels can dance on the head of a pin, to make a medieval reference. I just wonder if fundamentally there isn't something better to do than this in terms of cost. I was just, while the presentation was going on, trying to figure out what regional transit's cost per rider is right now. That number would probably be a little shocking to most people on this call. In other words, how much do we spend every time we move someone from point A to point B? So I don't know. I understand the point of this study. I think it's hopeful. I worry about having really esoteric arguments that populate plans that make those plans less valuable. Given our density, I don't know how much hope there is for a big uptick of suburban transit use. That seems like a pipe dream to me at this point. So I wish there was another alternative. I wish there was an electrically based Uber service that would probably save us money and be a heck of a lot better in terms of transit provision than fixed line or buses could ever be. So that's sort of where I am. I just thought I would share a little of my now 21-year insight with the rest of the committee.
Director Sand, Vice Chair Soon, do you mind if I just jump in
Please.
here.
Yeah.
Obviously, we've had this debate, and rightfully so, right? In this committee and with this board and this region for the last, well, probably for a long time. And COVID in some ways has sort of accelerated this question about the future of transit because the ridership has dropped. So I'm not going to disagree with any of your skepticism here, because I think we should be both optimistic and very skeptical at the same time. I would say, when those of you that came with us to Salt Lake City and you rode the dedicated bus rapid transit in a small suburban town and city called Provo, Utah, and you, for the first time, because remember, we don't have any here yet, you saw what it meant to have a dedicated lane. You saw what it meant to actually have signal prioritization. I'd like to, and we're working very closely with Sacramento RT on this. Let's see what something like that could do, right? You know, dedication, reliability, and then I think on micro, and we're going to have these conversations. We have, you probably have all seen, there's money that come out of the state budget statewide that is coming to this region on transit very specifically, and so there's going to be some really interesting policy conversations, including the point-to-point microtransit question, right? So we're seeing microtransit pop up more and more on demand, point-to-point. Kind of like Uber and a bus married and had a kid, and that's microtransit. That's sort of what the service is. And it's probably a better service, and it's more point to point. It's more customer friendly. It is a more expensive service, right? So those are the very live issues, I think, in front of us. Notwithstanding, I think the opportunity that we're trying to explore in this high capacity network, that's informed by a lot of actual real-time data about origin and destinations, and some of these corridors we think, as Director Branscombe just mentioned earlier, you know, may yield some results. Anyway, all of that is in play, and I think you should be prepared. I think this committee in particular to really be digging in on the not just traditional fixed route transit, but the general idea of moving people, you know, with some sort of innovative mobility service in the next few months.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Corliss, and to all the SACOG staff. Great work in getting us this far. I think this still is a worthy effort as well, connecting our region together. I'm going to go out to our audience or attendees. I don't see any hands up, but Lynette, can you just confirm?
There's no public comment.
Okay, great. Thank you. Again, this is an informational item. And with that, I think we'll move on to our final informational item. Lynette, you want to go ahead and announce that one?
Sure, thank you. Agenda item number 9, information item is SACOG.
Oh, broke up. We lost you. It went on mute. YOLO Room went on mute. There you go.
Apologies, here we go. Agenda item number 9 is an information item, and it's SACOG memorandum to Sacramento Transportation Authority, and this will be presented by Christina Svensk.
Hi again. Yep. So I don't know how many folks pay attention to the Sacramento Transportation Authority board. I'm sure some of you do. But what was it, in August? There was an item on the STA agenda for a memo that was prepared by SACOG, and we just wanted to take a few minutes to just talk a little bit about that and kind of give you all an understanding of what that memo was, why we prepared that memo, and why we think it's kind of an exciting opportunity, I think, for us to show some regional collaboration on some important issues. So Kevin Busey, the executive director of the Sacramento Transportation Authority, did reach out to James and SACOG staff to start to talk about what projects really are kind of needing, I guess, a little bit of attention, might be a good way to put it, that really relate to our blueprint and our MTP SCS that we have right now, and how we can help to really meet some of our reduction targets for greenhouse gas emissions and for VMT. And so staff, SACOG staff and James worked to develop a memo that helped outline, some of the really key areas and key problem areas and key areas for opportunity in the region as it relates to transportation infrastructure and transportation mobility, and where there's room for some attention and some improvements. So I'm going to turn it over to James.
Sure. Yeah, and I think there's in your packet you'll see there's basically there's 4 general categories, and we're going to pick up some themes that you just heard about and I just spoke to. So again, the question really is, in any kind of future revenue measure, particularly any kind of future tax measure in Sacramento County, this was asked by STA, which is great, and I just want to again actually thank the executive director for being proactive and saying in a future measure what would actually help and go above and beyond have the county help the region meet its greenhouse gas reduction targets. So 4 categories of projects, in some ways grouped in priority order, and these will be familiar to all of you on the SACOG board. The first is actually Green Means Go, because if you actually unpack our regional plan and you look at what will actually make a difference to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, it is more housing in places where people don't drive as much, right? That's the VMT maps that we show you, and all those green and yellow areas, frankly, is a VMT per capita map, but it also is our economic development map. And so infrastructure funding to help just per all the Green Means Go and the great work we've done on green zones. They've got green zones in every single jurisdiction of the county. And that is, we got 34 million from the state, but it's not fully funded. So that was the first category, is actually producing some housing at all price points where people don't need to drive as much. So that was the first category. Second is really about transit, and just per the last discussion, we pulled in Sacramento Regional Transit and really walked through a lot of their projects that are kind of teed up for funding. And what we came out with on that is really a big emphasis, as I just mentioned, on speeding up transit, reliability, and dedication. So bus rapid transit really in the corridors that many of us were just mentioned in the last item. Third item is really around repairing streets, complete streets, fixing potholes, basically making streets multimodal. There are many streets throughout Sacramento County that need fixing, but also need safety treatments. So there's the streets piece of it, but there's also the trails network that we talked a lot about, and the board just adopted that plan last year. We didn't have a trails network plan 2 years ago or 4 years ago, but we do now. And we think there's a tremendous amount of opportunity there. And finally, again, just kind of ending where I mentioned in the last item on sort of microtransit and innovative mobility, we think huge potential there. That is not yet going to show up. So car share, microtransit mobility hubs, to be honest, it's not going to show up as a big percentage differential yet, but an investment and some local matching funds to be able to get some of those innovative mobility solutions, microtransit, car share on the ground and operating could pay off pretty big in the future. So again, we just really appreciate STA reaching out to us, working in partnership with us pulling agencies in, and it's in your packet. It was discussed at the STA board meeting, as Christina said. Some of you are crossover board members, and so I just want to make sure that you understood that, you saw it, and you knew about it. Again, our appreciation to all of our partners, including STA, on this.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Corliss. I'm going to go out to the public at this time. Not seeing any hands up from our directors. I see attendee with their hand up in the audience. Mr. Adams from SAC-RT, Anthony Adams. Go ahead and unmute. Yeah.
Thank you very much. My name is Anthony Adams. I'm Director of Planning and Grants at Sacramento Regional Transit. We would like to thank SACOG and STA for being proponents of a sustainable transportation future. The effects of climate change are becoming evident with events like the storms in January that toppled trees all over the city, and having the hottest summer on record becoming commonplace. To meet these climate goals of the state and federal government, we must have robust growth in the quality and quantity of transit services provided. At SAC-RT, we envision a Sacramento region that provides a network of bus rapid transit service, offering travel times that are faster than an automobile. This BRT network will serve as a backbone of our upgraded connections and be supported by increased frequencies of our local bus service. Also, placing housing by these transit resources is a great way to create new transit riders. As was previously mentioned, SAC-RT must also transition to zero emission operations by 2040. This could total up to 600 vehicles. And this transition is essential to not only reduce our emissions of our fleet, but to provide a better ridership experience. And Director Branscombe, SAC-RT is committed to having a resilient fleet, and we will incorporate battery storage technology or hydrogen to supplement our battery electric buses in the event of an emergency. So SAC-RT would again like to thank SACOG for discussing this critical issue, and we look forward to further coordination. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, with that, I don't see any other hands up from our attendees. At this
There's
time,
public comment.
okay, thank you very much. James, I just have a quick question, and I also appreciate Mr. Busey reaching out early. The last time, this is obviously, several times now we've gone round and round on this, is we established a working group, kind of last minute for the Citizens Initiative around STAs. Well, it was germane to STA, it wasn't STA's measure. But will that same effort be put forward again, earlier on so that we can better coordinate? I just think, having letters going back and forth isn't probably the best way for us to work with STA.
Well, I think if I'm getting your question, Vice Chair, soon, I'd say this memo and analysis, which was requested by STA, where we worked with them and SAC-RT and our other partners, is an example, honestly, of the early coordination that's needed. So this was not a surprise, right? This was a result of a lot of dialogue back and forth, a lot of communication with STA, and so absolutely. I mean, I think there's a major question, right, for our two counties coming up, Sacramento and Placer. Is the 2024 an opportunity to go to the ballot? That's a major question for the two counties. So yeah. Our position here is we would love to be involved early and often, and love to have good communication and good coordination. And so that's really, I think, what this effort and this item that you're hearing about is a good example of that.
Yeah.
Right.
I totally agree, and I guess I'm getting at is more, right? I mean, the last time, and again, unfortunately it was last minute, but we had, several of our directors participating as well. Is something like that going to be established earlier on?
Let me talk to STA and we'll get back to you.
Okay. Yeah, and I see the 4 categories, but just being intimately involved in this in the past, I mean, there's several issues that aren't addressed, right? With the road maintenance being one, and there's some transit investments. I think there's a conversation that could ensue, and then just capital projects that, while from this board's perspective, we know that reducing greenhouse gas emissions, investments in those type of capital projects are a priority. We also know there's, individual and respective jurisdictional priorities where further conversation can happen. So I just know there's more conversations than obviously that or excuse me, not more conversations, but there's more to it than this memo presents. So I just want to make sure that, to your point, we have ongoing and frequent conversations. Not just, staff is fantastic. You guys do all the hard work, but I just want to make sure our directors who may not be, who aren't part of Sacramento County, fully understand what STA's intent and priorities are as well. So it's and we have a lot of new members on this board as well. So I think putting them. I think that's
we'll see what happens, right? In the next few months. I would just say we really appreciate being asked. We really appreciate a partnership that is about, hey, how do we have a local measure that supports regional goals and local goals? Like, that's a great question. How do we have a measure that supports reducing greenhouse gas emissions? And by the way, a lot of fix it first and pothole stuff is in that category. So again, it's a really good beginning in my mind for a very important partnership.
Yeah, good. Okay. Thank you very much. Okay, with that, I think that was our last informational item, if I remember right. I'll move to other matters. Unless if none of our directors have anything they'd like to bring up, we do have a presentation here at noon, lessons learned from operating toll and express lanes. If you can join, that'd be great.
And Vice Chair Soon, it looks like Director Lauren has her hand raised.
Yes. Director Lauren, please go ahead.
Thank you so much for recognizing me. I wanted to take this opportunity to invite all the SACOG members to Winners on September 30th for the Carnitas Festival. It's a cultural festival it's live music all day from 4:30 to 10:30, including a banda from Oaxaca, carnitas, food trucks, free children's entertainment, and it would just be great to see some members from the region come out to Winners. Thank you. September 30th.
Thank you so much, Director Lauren. I love carnitas. Who doesn't? All right. Okay, with that, I'll give you all another 35 or 25 minutes before our noon presentation. With that, I'll adjourn the committee. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.